And I'm curious, like, how do you help people stop that cycle of, like, I don't know, almost being like ADD in the way that they look at their life?
Yeah, it's hard to keep up. We have come to a point where many people have already probably stopped listening to this podcast. Many
Yeah.
people don't have the patience to watch a video on Instagram that's longer than 26 seconds. And so there's this constant state, we're living in this state of what's the next thing, what's the next thing, what's the next thing. We've lost a little bit of patience, I think. And we get so distracted by these things that it's constant novelty and constant stimulation. And that can create a sense of overwhelm within the self where you're constantly trying to anchor yourself in these external things. And if they're changing so rapidly, how are we going to keep up? How am I going to know what's going to fulfill me? How am I going to know what's going to steady me? How am I going to know what is truly the thing or the things that are meant for me if I'm constantly being distracted and fed this information? I think it's going to be so interesting when we look at the next generation and the generation after that, and things like brain scans and how different those are going to look. Because I'm assuming you and I kind of grew up around the same time. We did not grow up with technology in front of us all the
Mhm.
time. And this isn't to, you know, burn social media or anything like that. It's so powerful and so wonderful in a lot of ways. But I think that's one of the biggest things that we see, where people are just being fed so much information, so many opinions, so many different perspectives. And we're not meant to process, we cannot process that much information. So it becomes this just distraction where we're living in this space of constant overwhelm and we forget to look within.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm seeing a lot, is I'm having to help people, even just doing things like value sort activities in session. Like, what are your values? And people struggle to even start those sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, and like the cliche in the coaching world, right, is if you start talking to someone, you're like, "Well, what do you picture your life to be like?" And they go, "I want to be Oprah." And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's trying to live someone else's life, or I want to be Elon Musk, right? And so, when we do, and I've been listening to some different therapists talk about this recently too, in which there are sort of, in the video that I was watching, he was talking about, like, there's these two sort of mindsets around therapy even. There's maybe the older school mindset of, like, this is a slow process that unveils things over time. And then there's kind of this newer mindset. Maybe it's new, maybe it's not. I'll let you let, get into it, but of, like, really hyper task oriented and, like, goal oriented kind of therapy. And I know in the coaching world, it's all very goal focused, right? Like, it's like, get a job, and that they're stressed out every day about getting that job. But have you seen any changes in the way that therapy has kind of been going in people taking their time or wanting to rush or having patience and things like that?
Oh, 100%, 100%. This is such a good topic and such a good question. Um, think about, I don't know if I should name anything, but these apps or these websites where they're marketing have 24/7 access to your therapist. You pay this flat monthly fee and you can text anytime, you can call anytime, you can schedule a session anytime. And yes, it's important that people have access to mental health resources. And I think the intention behind those things was to fill a very sad gap and very painful gap in the market. At the same time, though, it's creating this culture where we want instant relief. We want, again, that external fix and that external something to just take away that pain. And we're no longer learning how to tolerate discomfort, tolerate ambiguity. And those things are hallmarks of resilience, which are super critical, especially given what the entire world has been going through the last couple of years. If we don't, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, keep going.
If we don't learn how to, I mean, therapy is a tool. So my job, the way I see it, and I have several long-term clients because they enjoy that introspection process, and they enjoy, constantly learning about themselves and constantly uncovering things, and that is beneficial for them. But these programs, it's like we have to learn how to be our own resource. So it's my job in general to teach people how to fish and how to, again, anchor themselves in things that are beneficial for them, learn enough about themselves to know what's going to work for them. And some people come in with, like, in the first session, they have this question of, okay, so are you going to fix this? I'm like, well, if I had that kind of power, I don't know that I would be a therapist. Like, I don't want to know what the world would look like if we had that kind of power. We could just take things away. I actually worked at a university setting for several years, and this particular student population was they had generally grown up with resources, therapy since they were 4 or 5, psychiatrists since they were very young. Some even had coaches starting from when they were teenagers. I mean, they were in a pressure cooker of a society, and it was all very achievement oriented. So they had all of these resources. They generally came from wealthy families that were able to provide them with those things. And then they come to university and they're expected to tolerate feeling overwhelmed. They're expected to know how to navigate being a young adult, balance schedules, balance that with their social lives, all the while navigating these expectations and this pressure. And what we would see is we had walk-in services. So people could, of course, come in for their regular appointments, but we had someone on call during the day in case there was something urgent, like someone was just assaulted, or someone's having a panic attack or suicidal ideation or any of these things. Like, of course, please come in. We would see people come in, sit down and fill out paperwork and insist on seeing someone right away for things that we would anticipate a young adult could tolerate, like someone not texting them back, not getting the grade they wanted on an exam. So these are, of course, instances where I would say, hey, Martin, like, I just had a really bad day. I would reach out to a friend. If I got dumped, I would eat Ben and Jerry's and cry with my girlfriends. But we were seeing people come in for mental health services because they did not know how to tolerate painful emotions, and they wanted someone to take that away immediately. And that was a little disheartening, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. And I can see that in the coaching world as well. Because I give my clients access to Slack, and it's kind of interesting how, like, I sort of, in my mind, I'm like, oh, Slack is like, I'll get back to you within 24 hours, right? But people will be like, I have an interview in 20 minutes. And I'm like, I'm probably on a call. Like, I can't help you right this second.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how, like, it does take away that personal agency, right? And it almost feels like sometimes I have way more trust in the person than they have in themselves, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of this idea of, like, when you're saying people come in over like a text, or people come in over these things, it plays into another podcast that I did about loneliness in the workplace, where we are sort of in a place where, the cliche is everyone's connected socially, but no one's actually connected personally, right? And it in the age of, like, COVID and pandemic and, like, being inside and everything, I've even seen with my friends, like, the ability to just sort of schedule something for, like, or like to say, hey, what are you doing on Friday? Let's go out, or something like that. Like, everything has become hyper scheduled as well. It's like, what are you doing in 3 months? Like, that's kind of where friendships are at this point. And it actually, even in the world that I'm in, it's like, it takes a lot of effort to sort of even plan phone calls with people and things like that. And I do feel that this sort of is being felt in a lot of different places, both interpersonally in our lives, but also in the workplace as we go more remote. We don't have the ability to just, like, pop by our boss's desk. We don't have the ability to, like, have, like, I remember when I first started working remote, if I just wanted to be like, hey, how's it going? And like talk to a coworker, I'd have to set up a meeting about something. Like it'd be like weird. And so it does sort of seem to be increasing this isolation while also giving people services that take away their ability to, as you said, build that resiliency and build that ability to be by themselves dealing with an emotion, right? And
Yeah.
so we're kind of becoming weaker on both ends in a way. When it comes down to like bouncing back from that, or like, let's say you notice that in your life, someone's listening and they go, wow, yeah, I'm actually having a really hard time just being by myself. What are some things that they can start thinking about or doing or practicing in order to build that resiliency muscle?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to emphasize the importance of connectedness and relationships. So, if someone is feeling lonely, that's a very painful experience. Anyone experiencing life stressors, mental health concerns, physical health concerns, and even if you're not, you need social support. That's the only reason we've been able to make it this long as human beings. And it's the only reason we will continue to make it through difficult times. And there's absolutely nothing wrong. Obviously, I think you and I can both agree, never anything wrong with reaching out for support. And this isn't to minimize, that a text, not receiving a text is going to be difficult for somebody, because that's where they are, and that in their life is the crisis. All of that being said, it is important to build that resiliency muscle, because sometimes we can start to misinterpret things. So if I reach out to a friend and they happen to be in a very busy season in their life, and I misread that and I think, oh, they don't care about me, how's that going to affect me? So part of resiliency is going to be about giving yourself grace, giving other people grace, and understanding that there is a wide toolbox and toolkit of things that you can do for yourself